guys, welcome to week 50. Man, after this week, 2 more weeks, and then we are done reading the Bible together. Are you excited? Because I'm excited. This is awesome. I want to bring out a few things this week. Again, there's some stuff that's controversial because we're in 1 Timothy, and so bear with me. I have opinions. I did get in trouble for my opinions in seminary, but I still have the opinions. And so we can talk about it, and you're free to disagree, and it's just part of learning together. So, first, 1 Timothy 2:11 through 15. Let a woman learn in silence with all submission. And I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man, but to be in silence. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. Nevertheless, she will be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. So what's going on here? Man, there's a lot that is said about this. I want to bring out a couple of things. One is Dwayne Litfin in the Bible Knowledge Commentary. He says that the word for quietness, which is here it's hesukia, and that's what you see, let a woman learn in silence, that's hesukia, but to be in silence, again, hesukia. It's the same word. And he says this word doesn't indicate silence, but order, in the sense of not being unruly. And so the idea here is for a woman to learn in a way that is orderly, and not necessarily that she's completely silent. And then the other thing here is when it says, like, don't let a woman have authority over a man, don't let a woman teach a man, that kind of thing. There have been people throughout history who said women can't teach men at all. And so lots of crazy things have happened. You know, in the 1800s, there would be women's meetings where there were Baptists, and they were coming up with, you know, things to try to organize themselves as women, and a man would actually have to give the address, because they would say that a man has to be in charge of this and has to be the head of this, and if there are men present, the man has to talk. Women shouldn't talk, even to bring forward their own resolutions. And so there have been a lot of places in history where this has been applied very harshly, and I think harshly toward women, really, really badly. And so what's going on here? I think that there's a little bit of wiggle room here, because you've got 2 words in Greek for man. You have anthropos and then you have aner. And the word that's actually used here is aner. And so the word aner is the word that's specifically used for, like, a specific man. And typically when you see somebody talked about as somebody's husband in the Bible, it's the word aner. It's not the word anthropos, because anthropos is more like humanity, men in general, that kind of thing. Like what would be the word? Like universal man, that kind of idea. That's not the word that is used here. I think that I could make a pretty good argument for the idea here being that a woman shouldn't be the teacher. And there was a theologian that looked at that, and he said, like, this infinitive, to teach, is actually a present infinitive. And so the idea is not necessarily to do the act of teaching, but the idea is more to be a teacher. And so to have that position of being a teacher, because it's a present infinitive. And so it says, that's Howard A. Kent Jr. He says the word didakein likely means more to be a teacher rather than to teach. And so I think the idea here is that a woman shouldn't be the teacher and the person in authority, or here alphintain, to have authority over, a lot of times is like the idea of a harsh authority, like browbeat. So it says a lot more about, like, the woman shouldn't be like the main teacher, or like the one who's like beating down her husband and like ruling over her husband. And so that would be my opinion of what's going on here in this first part. And not necessarily that women don't have anything to teach men or have anything to say to men, because I think you see in, Priscilla and Aquila, Priscilla was the one mentioned first every single time, and she was the one probably that was doing a lot of the teaching between her and Aquila. It's very likely that they taught as a team, which I think is so healthy. But what we have here that I think is going on is it's probably like a woman's not supposed to be dominating her husband and being his main teacher. Like, a man should be learning on his own and not depending on his wife to be his teacher. No woman wants that either, like, for the man to be like totally dependent spiritually and she has to motivate him to do everything. I don't know. We can disagree if you like, and we're still friends. The other part of this that's really weird is the part where it says that she will be saved in childbearing. And this is a part that a lot of people have looked at, and a lot of people have said we have no idea. But there are a few options for how it could be seen. So there are 4 basic views. The first is physical salvation in childbirth. That women will be saved while bearing children, in the sense of they will not die in childbirth. This is highly unlikely because there are plenty of Christian women that have died in childbirth, and so that would make this a lie. The other one is spiritual salvation through childbirth. And so, women having children, that's how you get saved. Deeply unlikely because salvation only comes through Christ. That one's fair. And also, people like me would never be able to get saved. Number 3, spiritual salvation in the home. Women fulfilling God-given role as wives and mothers. Also unlikely. Not every woman gets to fulfill those roles. And then 2, we've never seen any sense of like having a role saves you, ever. And then number 4 is spiritual salvation through the incarnation of Christ. And so then she'll be saved by the child that is born with a capital C, through this child being born. And then it talks about like they're continuing in like faith and all of this kind of stuff. And so maybe the idea is the context being here of like Eve and Adam in creation, and how there will be a kind of a redemption that will come to Eve and by extension all women through Christ if they continue in faith. And so that's women having faith in Christ, being saved, which I think checks out theologically in a lot of ways. So this is the most likely option, but really nobody actually knows. And those four views come from Homer A. Kent's commentary on the pastoral epistles. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully I'm not muddying the waters more. Another one would be 1 Timothy 5, 3 through 16. There's a lot that Paul spends here on managing widows and making sure widows are treated right and the right kinds of widows are accepted by the church, and then sort of in general making sure that these women who are not married and with children, like that they behave themselves. So what's going on here? Part of the situation here is that women were frequently left without a career or a way of supporting themselves if their husbands died. And this is a time period where, men are more likely to get killed at their job. You didn't have OSHA, you didn't have safety standards, and I've lived in places like that, and people lost limbs a lot more frequently than they do here. People died on the job a lot more frequently than they do here. So men were more likely to die. And then also there were armies and soldiers, and men were also more likely to die. And so you have a lot of women around who didn't have husbands and maybe couldn't get husbands. And so these could very, very easily become a burden on the church because they didn't have a way to take care of themselves. Or if their families found it a lot easier to just sort of like toss mom to the church than take care of mom. And so that's something that happens even today in a lot of places too. People are not all compassionate. And so the church could very quickly become like just a welfare thing for women that was just easier than anything else to access. And so there needed to be an order to make sure that women in the church, or the women that the church would take responsibility for, genuinely didn't have another way of making a living. So that the money and the time and the resources of the church were well used, and not used on someone who was going to use them like just until she got married or something like that. And you see that Paul definitely says, like, if there's a family that is able to take care of a widow, that family should very definitely do that so that the church can take care of widows who don't have families, and so that there are enough resources for people who genuinely need them. And so I think that's kind of what's going on. The church doesn't exist to support people who don't find a way to make a living or don't keep themselves usefully occupied. And this was some of that. If there was an opportunity for them to do a job or get out there and support themselves or even get married, then they should, according to Paul, so that they can be responsible and not just be like a drain on the resources. That sounds a little harsh, but just because I think we're nicer than we need to be sometimes, maybe. I don't know. I think there are definitely special cases, and we definitely need to consider people who need help on a one-on-one basis. But I think Paul out here is laying some really good ground rules for the church not to be taken advantage of, which I think is wise too, because the church is God's church using God's money for God's things, and it needs to be careful to be a good steward of that. So hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully I've expressed it well. I don't know. 1 Timothy 5, 24 through 25. This is more of an observation. It says, some men's sins are clearly evident, preceding them to judgment, but those of some men follow later. Likewise, the good works of some are clearly evident, and those that are otherwise cannot be hidden. I like this verse because how many of us have looked at the life of somebody else that doesn't seem to have any problems? They don't seem to have like a nasty background or a lot of junk that they've done in their lives, and they just seem to be overall clean, and like their family is squeaky clean, and like you just sort of want to kneecap them, Maybe you don't. Maybe you're nicer than I am. But one of the things that we can see here that Paul is saying is that some people's sins are obvious and some people's sins aren't. And so when we look at someone and we see a perfectly crafted image and they look like they're just so perfect, that's just because what's going on the inside hasn't come out yet. And also, it's the same way with good works. We assume that somebody's terrible or whatever. There's maybe a lot of stuff that they're doing that we don't know about, and so we probably shouldn't judge them on that either. And so I think it's just here just a caution about judging people as being way better than you or judging people as being way worse than you, because you really don't know whether their sins are following them or preceding them. And you really don't know whether their good works are following or preceding them either. So that just gives us kind of some moderation in how we think about other people. Okay, so one last one, Titus 1:14, he tells them not to give heed to Jewish fables and commandments of men who turn from the truth. So, Jewish fables, what's going on here? A lot of times when we read this, we read the Bible, we don't really know a lot about the cultural stuff that was happening around it. And there's actually been some pretty good research done on books like Ephesians, and where it looks into the background of what's going on outside the scripture, and that there were a lot of Jewish sorcerers like Elymas, who we see in the Bible. And there were a lot of people who did a lot of weird magical things with like using God's covenant name in bowls to like curse the sea and curse the day and all this kind of stuff. And there were a lot of fables that were out there. One of the big things is just angelology. There was this whole system of all kinds of different angels, and they had a different hierarchy, and they had names, and they had things they were good for. And so you could talk to different ones for different purposes. And so that may be some of what Paul is referring to when he says Jewish fables. But what we see is that there were like philosophical or theological stumbling blocks that exist today that existed as far back as Paul. So there's really nothing new. So I hope that helps. So I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll talk to you next week.